Peace, joy, and comfort is our natural place. They are our inheritances and birthright. Unlike a conventional inheritance, our right to it is based solely on who we are. Unless, of course, we do not know who we are, in which case we will not come forward to claim this glorious inheritance. The perceptions that we now hold about who we are and what we are have been based on what seems like reliable evidence that we have gathered through our limited senses, and by what we have been taught by those around us, who, in turn, have learned what we are and what they are in the same way. But can the evidence of these senses be trusted? Are the limitations that we assume about ourselves true? Is there more to us? Does the identity we keep so securely imprinted on our minds serve us well in our ultimate goal of unbridled joy? The science of evolution, as documented by Charles Darwin, dealt only with the evolution of physical bodies. However, there is more to us than this gross body, and what really sets us ahead on the evolutionary chain is more subtle than it. Hindu Vedic philosophy reveals what those subtle aspects of man's composition are. This philosophy has been reintroduced to us by Guru Sri Sathya Sai Baba. Sai Baba explains that the human being is constituted of 5 sheaths. These 5 sheaths are, however, only tools to our true selves and not our permanent being. Instead, these 5 sheaths encase our true selves like a scabbard encases a sword. The sheaths start at the gross and tangible level and then become increasingly more subtle, beginning with the only physically tangible sheath, the physical body. The physical body is known as the food sheath in Vedic philosophy because the body is built from food and will return to food one day, ever pointing to its impermanence, where, like food, the physical body is so easily subject to change and disintegration. The physical human body is the most impermanent of the 5 sheaths. Yet, we identify with it so strongly. When we identify ourselves with the physical body, we are said to be in a state of ordinary consciousness. Thus, the realization that we are not a physical body is critical to our progress beyond the ordinary, into knowing our truth and expanding into experiencing it. However, it is only in these human bodies that we can ascend back to the heights of our actual greatness, and we must therefore appreciate the opportunity we have within it, with all the potential it provides to us. How can we reconcile being so small compared to the full size of the universe? And yet, so much indicates to us that we are so far from insignificant. But this insignificant size is only true if we are the physical body. Through this philosophy, we learn that this is simply not so. We are not limited to and defined by the human body, and we are certainly not insignificant, as its comparative size seems to indicate. The body is merely a tool. It is only our perception that has limited us to believing that we are it, and it is thus simply a change in perception that can set us free from the same old experiences built up around the limited senses. Sheath 2 is described as the life sheath, or pranamaya kosha. Prana is the life force. In respect of the human structure, pranic energy is divided into 5 different aspects, known as the 5 vital airs, which each have their own function, including energizing and managing the various bodily processes, even recording your thoughts and actions, and carrying out their resulting effects within the body and perhaps beyond it too. But it too is not who we are. The third sheath is the mind sheath, which includes sensory perception and the mind. In the mental sheath, our minds are described as being in the state of ordinary mind. The mind is responsible for the ego. The ego is the false belief that we are the body and mind. And thus, it is the false belief that we are separate from all others and all else. The mind is useful, but only to a degree, and only when used with discretion. It is helpful in preserving our safety in this world, but its perception is limited to the realm of the physical, and can thus only take us so far in the experience of our reality. The first steps for our spiritual growth start in the mind, but it is beyond the mind where our true power lies, and therefore we cannot be this highly praised tool, the mind. But these sheaths do serve as tools for that self within the world, tools to animate and protect the body, which is a vessel for our own evolution, as well as the evolution of our families, societies, and world. But if we are not the body, nor the mind, what are we? Sri Sathya Sai Baba has revealed, whereas other beings can at best reach out to 3 sheaths, man can easily go to the 4th and even beyond, if he makes the effort. This is what makes man so superior. Thus, the most significant evolutionary difference between those amongst mankind that have reached the heights of human evolution and the rest of the animal kingdom is our ability to access the 4th sheath and beyond. What is the 4th sheath then? According to Vedic philosophy, as explained by Sai Baba, the 4th sheath is known as the wisdom sheath. It is also described as the intellectual sheath, the conscience, the intelligence sheath, or the sheath of intuition. These various names give us an indication of the nature of this sheath. But of course, the word intellect as used here does not refer to worldly intellectualism, but rather the power of intellect that allows one to understand things deeper and more subtle than what is presented to the senses by the world. Operating in this sheath gives human beings the ability to discriminate between right and wrong, and between true and false. In other words, it gives us discernment, which also translates to heightened intuition, or the ability to pick up on and correctly interpret the messages and clues that the universe places before us, with the purpose of guiding and directing us back to ourselves. From the Holy Quran, behold, in the heavens as well as on earth, there are indeed messages for all who are willing to believe. And in your own nature, and in that of all the animals which he scatters over the earth, there are messages for people who are endowed with inner certainty, and in the succession of the night and day, and in the means of subsistence which God sends down from the skies, giving life thereby to the earth after it had been lifeless, and in the change of the winds. In all this, there are messages for people who use their reason. This extract from the Quran is telling us that everything in our lives, from the obvious to the most subtle, is a series of messages to us, but that these messages can only be deciphered by those who use reason, And this is that wisdom, that intellect, that intuition that is found in our wisdom sheath. There can be no progress on the spiritual path until we act in line with our ability to reason correctly and apply the messages of the conscience or the wisdom sheath. It is the very starting point of our further evolution and our guiding light throughout the progressive journey. It may sound tiresome to some to have to follow the dictates of the conscience, but the ability to hear its wisdom and understand how to act upon it for the benefit of oneself and our societies is vital for any progress beyond that of the ordinary mind. And truly, only when we act in line with it can we ever enjoy lasting peace. This is one of the reasons why every major religion emphasizes strong moral and ethical principles over and over again. These guidelines from religion are the voices of the inner consciences of the saints and sages of the past. But the wisdom sheath does not only dictate what is right from wrong, it also shows us what is true from false. It helps us to change our perceptions away from the delusion that fouls our sight and allows us to see clearly what we are and what our world truly is about. Thus, this wisdom shows us the truth. But when the word truth is used in this philosophy, its definition is not merely that of honesty applied in our limited worldly situations. Rather, truth is that which is true and unchanging at all times, past, present, and future. And this truth is what we attempt to see by means of the wisdom sheath. Through it, we try to perceive and thus experience what is eternal, even within this transient world. And thus, the greatest use of the wisdom sheath is that it allows us to begin to understand our own true, eternal nature, causing us to think and act in line with this nature, and therefore gradually come into experiencing that nature, experiencing who we truly are. Sai Baba explains that it is in the wisdom sheath that we begin to go beyond the ordinary mind, to reach what is referred to as supermind, which, as the name suggests, is superior to the ordinary mind. This supermind can also be described as transcendental consciousness. Therefore, the increasing of our spiritual wisdom is an evolution of consciousness, also known as awareness. The eminent Islamic philosopher known as Mullah Sadra of the 17th century spoke of a wisdom that is transcendental in nature. Transcendental is that which is beyond what we know as the ordinary world and its ordinary physical laws. He termed the body of wisdom that he collected as transcendent theosophy. Mullah Sadra described hikmah, meaning wisdom, as coming to know the essence of beings as they really are. Spiritual wisdom was a pronounced concept of Christian theology in the beginnings of the religion's growth. Early Christian traditions emphasized what was referred to as divine wisdom or Hagia Sophia in ancient Greek, with Sophia translating to wisdom. The Hagia Sophia Church in Istanbul, Turkey, was built in the year 537 as an imposing reminder of the holiness of this aspect of divinity, wisdom, an aspect critical to our individual spiritual growth. The sacred site continues the legacy of prayerful worship by functioning today as a mosque. So far, we have found that strengthening the wisdom sheath is the first step in the further spiritual evolution of humanity. But how do we strengthen this sheath? To grow spiritual wisdom, one needs to reduce the opposite of wisdom, which is ignorance or delusion, specifically the ignorance that veils our inner consciousness. And one way ignorance can be reversed is by knowledge. But not just any knowledge now, because this is not just any ignorance. The ignorance that veils our inner consciousness is the ignorance of the truth of ourselves and all else, and this ignorance must be offset by the knowledge of our true selves and all else. When you study the world's religions, you see evidence of this knowledge having been received by those that have themselves evolved or accessed their higher consciousness. Throughout history and throughout the world's societies, we see chinks in the walls that hide the knowledge from our view, and the light that comes through is passed around but not always understood, and sometimes not passed very far. But it is there. And amongst those chinks in the wall of illusion and ignorance stands those who have completely understood and who have come into complete wisdom. And it is these rare and treasured souls that we must turn to for inspiration on our inner path. Thus, words and works of knowledge can help to scatter the ignorance that dims the consciousness within, helping to destroy the misconceptions about ourselves, our world, and God, and in so doing reveal the most beautiful truths. Without the use of knowledge, the inner conscience is easily drowned out by the cacophony of now dominating thoughts created by the ego and senses. And sadly, the beautiful truths are then kept from our perception longer than need be. Sri Krishna said to Arjuna, "Even if you are considered to be the most sinful of all sinners, when you are situated in the boat of transcendental knowledge, you will be able to cross over the ocean of miseries. As a blazing fire turns firewood to ashes, O Arjuna, so does the fire of knowledge burn to ashes all reactions to material activities." Such is the power of the knowledge of the truth of ourselves and all else, and the wisdom that comes with it, that it can destroy even the results of past actions that we once thought we were bound to forever. But alas, this knowledge has been hidden in parables and analogies for thousands of years, and it is only when coupled with wisdom that its true meanings can be deciphered and understood. Solomon's book of Proverbs begins with a tribute to the wisdom needed to understand a proverb and an enigma, the words of the wise and their riddles. And thus, there is certainly a place for logic and reasoning in spirituality. In fact, it is the very starting point of our growth, and we must allow ourselves to engage in this necessary self-inquiry for the sake of our evolution. Jesus was asked by his disciples why he speaks to the crowds in parables, which are often cryptic analogies. Jesus only shared the meaning of these parables with his disciples and not with the crowds. Jesus explained, "For whoever has understanding, to him more will be given, and he will have abundance. But whoever does not have understanding, even what he has will be taken away from him. Therefore, I speak to them in parables, because seeing they do not see, and hearing they do not hear, nor do they understand." In this, Jesus speaks of the consequences of placing knowledge of the kingdom of heaven, or transcendental knowledge, in the hands of those that are not ready to understand it, and that by misinterpreting that knowledge, they would lose even what understanding they had possessed to begin with, because false interpretations could cause more harm than good, more tragedy than relief, more sadness than joy. And Jesus understood this danger. He therefore used parables as a sort of assessment criteria, which allows only those with wisdom into the sanctums of its truth. Mankind loves to cling to beliefs that support and promote what one already believes. And in the case of the ordinary person, this is likely to be beliefs that speak to the ego and a sense of separation. And we see evidence of this as we see religious philosophy being used as a tool for hatred and division due to misinterpretation that serves the ego instead of God and the truth. It is wisdom that can guard us against such false interpretations of knowledge, and it is only then that we will be deemed fit to fully receive that knowledge and be led through the gateway into the sanctum of truth. Apart from knowledge, there is one other powerful tool needed for the evolution of mankind, and that is that ultimate tool: focus on God. It is God that is the owner and creator of all true knowledge and wisdom. It is He that can guide us to the true knowledge, and He can also automatically grant us true wisdom if we so earn His grace. And thus, knowledge must be used with focus on God as dual weapons in the growth of the wisdom sheath. These are the two most powerful weapons for our own true evolution and ultimate emancipation. Now we come to the final and fifth sheath of our structure, which is the sheath that comes closest to the true self. This final sheath is known as the bliss sheath, and as its name denotes, the experience of divine bliss is the characteristic of this sheath. Bliss, unlike mere worldly happiness, is peaceful in nature and is independent of worldly stimulation or prompting, and thus can be tapped into just by an evolution in consciousness. This sheath is made up of our subconscious mind, or chitta in Sanskrit, and what is known as prajna, meaning constant integrated awareness of God as what He truly is, and therefore it is the constant awareness of truth. Prajna is the state of unchanging and permanent bliss described by the Upanishads, the body of Hindu Vedic philosophy. In the bliss sheath, Sai Baba speaks of two further evolutions of mind. The first being the higher mind. The higher mind breaks the bondage of body consciousness and proceeds to thought consciousness. Body consciousness is limited to the physical level, whereas thought consciousness has no such limits and can travel up to any distance. That is why thought consciousness is termed higher mind. Higher mind transcends the 5 elements. Breaking the barriers imposed by our identification with a body releases us to this higher mind, this thought mind. And this thought mind, Sai Baba says, is achieved through sincere and unconditional love. This love is what breaks the barriers of perceived forms. This love is the basis of the conscience. But as you will see, as the knowledge of the truth is revealed, it is the basis of the entire creation. When you experience a feeling of oneness with the whole of creation, you will have cut a path for yourself to reach the higher mind. From here, our evolution continues even within the bliss sheath to reach a level known as illumination mind. And this occurs when our thoughts are now redirected back to the source of it all. This state of mind or consciousness is achieved by having full control over our worldly thoughts. And so we proceed from supermind in the wisdom sheath, which gives us the discernment to know which thoughts we are meant to be rid of or to keep, to the higher mind, where we propagate loving and unifying thoughts, which evolves us further still to illumination mind, where our thoughts are now completely under control. Illumination mind will go around the world. It has no specific name and form. It has no physical nature. Illumination mind has nothing to do with lust, greed, anger, and avarice. Through illumination mind, we begin to travel from the point of thoughts. Does this mean out-of-body travel? I suppose we'll know for sure when we reach this state. But what we do know from Sai Baba's teachings is that this is a state of equanimity, which in spiritual parlance is known as samadhi. This state of mind results in changes in the body too, including increased current within the body, as was experienced by the sages of yore. The moment the body comes close to illumination mind, it gets transformed. Thus, while our further evolution is centered around a progression in consciousness or levels of mind, it does not exclude positive knock-on effects in the physical body. But there is more that is even beyond these states of mind. I have said that our true eternal selves is what lies beyond the 5 sheaths, and although the bliss sheath is closest to the true self, it is not it itself. The bliss sheath is merely a reflection of the true self, like the moon reflects the light of the sun. And although we can derive bliss from the bliss sheath, it is not the full extent of what we can have. When we get to experience the true self, says Sai Baba, it is then that we come into total bliss, an experience and a joy which is said to eclipse all others by far. In it, we experience that stage of mind known as overmind. When one reaches this state of overmind, we reach that state of totality. This is also known as our supercausal body. The supercausal body, which is also known as the overmind, is self-resplendent, self-luminous, and self-radiant. This means that the wonderful attributes of the true self are dependent only on the existence of that self, and not on anything outside of it, not on any deed, nor any purchase, not dependent on the love of another, on descendants or possessions, on food or comfort, but dependent completely on being one's true self. This is a state of complete, ineffable bliss, in which the universal consciousness alone is experienced. It is beyond description. And this is why we need to know who we truly are, and why we need to strive to experience that truth. From what I understand of it, through Sai Baba's discourses, supermind to overmind is a progression in the development of love, a progression in the development of the sense of unity, and a progression in the understanding and experience of who we really are. From these, we also benefit from the progression in our divine bliss, which is the ultimate goal of life. In the mystic body of religious practices within Islam, known as Sufism, there is also a philosophy that describes the progression of human consciousness. In the Sufi philosophy, reference is made to lataif, directly translated to subtleties, but meaning subtle levels within a human being, their awakening leading to progressive levels of consciousness, which are only directly experienced by human beings that have undergone spiritual evolution. It was Mullah Sadra that said, "Know that the human is the most noble of beings." But he was at the beginning of his generation in the very limits of baseness and imperfection that arise out of the nature of the elements and components that formed him, like all other species of animals, except that he had, in his essence, a faculty of progression to the very limit of perfection, and progress to the lights of the transcendent origin and the active sustainer, stripped of evil and calamity, becoming one of the inhabitants of the world of light, bestowed with the bounty of the afterlife and with bliss. It does not behove divine providence to allow him, the human, to wallow in the grazing grounds of the passions like insects and worms, for it is known that everything has a perfection that is specific to it, for which it was created, and an act that completes it, that is appropriate to it. Within Buddhist philosophy is what is known as the three practices. This Buddhist philosophy is nothing short of a pointer to achieving the climax of evolution, as the Buddha did. These practices, in essence, mirror the progress of human consciousness described here. The first of these three practices are sila, meaning moral virtues, which reminds us of the functioning of the wisdom sheath, our first stepping stone in the progressive process. Next comes samadhi, which is the state achieved in the bliss sheath, in the illumination mind, a state of equanimity achieved when the thoughts come fully under our control. The next practice is prajna, which is the state of constant integrated awareness of truth, which was also described as an attribute of the bliss sheath. Likewise, Jesus harped upon living by the conscience in his gospel. "For I say to you that unless your righteousness exceeds the righteousness of the scribes and Pharisees, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven." Sai Baba also said, "Only in an individual who is morally strong does the human personality find its best expression." Jesus was one such personality who manifested the perfection man is capable of. He was an example of the highest expression of human excellence. Jesus saw the value of wisdom and understanding in the progression of spirituality. Jesus himself was associated with divine wisdom from earliest of times. Jesus hailed love for God and for all others as the most important commandments given to mankind, and this attribute of unconditional love is what is needed for the entry into the higher mind of the bliss sheath. Jesus' focus on and faith in God is characteristic of what is expected in the illumination mind, when our thoughts must go back to the source, which is God. The goal of spiritual evolution is described by Jesus as the kingdom of God or the kingdom of heaven. Its marvels we will only fully understand when we reach to its heights. Looking at Hinduism, Islam, Buddhism, and Christianity, we can assume that this system of human evolution is a part of many, if not all, religions, although described in various ways. But what is clear from all these philosophies is that happiness is a function of our inner being, and not a function of the external world. The bliss sheath derives its light of happiness from the glow of the true self, just as the moon derives its light from the sun. In fact, all of the 5 sheaths take their power and intelligence from the true self. It is the self that animates all of this. Without the true self, the 5 sheaths would be inanimate. It is this true self that we are, and it is in experiencing this true self that we come into total bliss. Humanity rightly applauds spiritual evolution above all, with our societies having revolved around the spiritual giants of history. Recognizing spiritual progress is justified. It is a nod to our next step of evolution. But more than just recognition, we need to inquire what the nature of those who attained this evolution was, and ourselves turn towards the path of the greats.